Hello and welcome to Forgotten Fronts. In today's episode, we'll be playing the mission Vorwarts, 16th Brigade, where we take command of the Prussian 16th Brigade to make the first attacks on the village of Placenoit. But first, the history. If you don't want to hear the history, a time will come up on your screen. Wait for it. Get your hand away from that mouse. Now! After a long and grueling march from the muddy, rutted roads from Ligny, the Prussians began to slowly reorganize their forces in the Bois de Paris. The Prussians attacked from the woods to use up Napoleon's last reserves at 4 p.m. when it appeared to Blucher that the French were to make another attack on Wellington's line. The attack was made by the 15th and 16th Brigade with support from the reserve artillery. The attack was still made despite the fact that the brigades were not entirely in position yet. To make matters worse, Franz Lieber writes, quote, "Our men were exhausted, but old Blucher allowed them no rest." End quote. The attack pushed back 2 French cavalry patrols, but the attack was slowed by 2 more divisions of French cavalry. This gave the time for the other battalions of the 15th and 16th Brigade to arrive on the field. Bülow formed his brigades with the 16th's 2 battalions on the left and the 15th's 3 battalions on the right, supported by the reserve cavalry and later the reserve artillery, which supported the flanks. At the same time, 2 battalions of the 15th were sent to Smohain, Friedmont, and Papelot to link with Saxe-Weimar's Nassauers. They arrive after 5, linking with the Nassauers after a 10-minute friendly fire incident. After the Prussians confused the Nassauers for the French due to their uniform and equipment being so similar. Since Bülow's forces were not committed at Ligny, they slowly began to outnumber Laval's forces, pushing back the cavalry who were soon replaced by skirmishers in the second phase of the attack. The skirmishers, quote, disputed every foot of ground, but not with any great conviction. The French skirmishers delayed the Prussians further until the 8th Hussar drove them back until they were halted by a square and driven back by the threat of cavalry. As the skirmish line fell back, Lobau deployed his remaining troops to cover the artillery. Lobau deployed one of his brigades in the village of Placenoit and the other 3 in the heights supported by the artillery and 2 brigades of cavalry. At 6, the 16th Brigade formed their 6 battalions numbering 14,000 men into 3 attack columns, screened with skirmishers to attack the village from 3 points at once. Their attack would be supported by the 15th, who included the battalions from Papelot in a similar formation with the 13th and 14th Brigade, who would arrive freshly on the field in reserve. The Prussians, extending their right flank almost to Lausanne, drove back the French brigades from the heights and prepared to attack Placenoit. The soldiers in Placenoit made the village a fort. Sharpshooters were posted in the houses and cannons pointed down the cobblestone roads, preparing to blast the attacking Prussians with canister. In the center of the town, a stone church on the hillock, surrounded by a cemetery enclosed by a stone wall, gave excellent cover for the defenders. The Prussian black flags flapped in the breeze, the foul-smelling powder smoke rolling over them as the men of the 16th Brigade awaited their orders, eager to avenge the loss at Ligny. The sergeants barely able to keep the Landwehr men in line, their blood up after pushing the French from the slight rise in the ground in front of the village of Placenoit. August Hiller von Gatrian looked back to see a courier galloping from the Bois de Paris, extending his arm with a dispatch clutch within it. Once the galloper arrived, von Gatrian read that he is to continue his attack on the French right, advancing to capture and occupy the village of Placenoit, threatening Napoleon's lines of communication and retreat. Taking a telescope from his saddlebag and looking over the ground, von Gatrian sends out couriers to the regiments. The couriers take out quickly scribbled out orders, kicking up mud as they galloped away. Von Gatrian begins the attack by ordering the guns of Captain Conradi to move to cover the brigade's advance, but the battery commander dithered as shouts and drumbeats from the 1st Silesian Landwehr signaled their advance. As they were ordered forward in double line, some of the Landwehr cheered as they advanced towards the village, their muskets and short pikes at the shoulder, their drums announcing the French doom. Some of the other men trembled in fear to sick excitement, cold sweat trickling down their brows and their mouths dry. The men saw the casualties of the savage melees in the villages of Ligny and expected the same savage hand-to-hand combat. On the right, the 2 squadrons of Landwehr cavalry under Captain Subnik was ordered forth to sweep away the French cannon to the right of the church. The squadron trotted towards the guns, kicking up mud, their curb chains jingling and their scabbards slapping against the horses' flanks. The French guns in response began to bombard the 2 brigades, smoke and flame belching from their barrels as gunners rushed forward to swab the barrels. Now that he had no choice, the battery commander finally obeyed his orders and began moving his guns, whips cracking over the horse's head as mud sucked at the wheels of the limbers. Then von Gatrian orders the 15th Infantry Brigade to lie down to protect them from the French cannon, but a round shot from the French guns plows a bloody furrow in the ranks of the regulars. Then a shell explodes overhead of one of their battalions in a black rain of shrapnel, its fragments smoldering around the battalion men. The cavalry's trot turns into a gallop across the field, their sabers and saddles glinting in the sun. This was enough to reveal their approach to the French guns, and a cannonball blasted through their ranks, shattering the legs of 2 horses, who screamed long and high-pitched, but the cavalry squadrons continued their advance. In the meantime, the landwehr column struggled to pass the 15th Infantry Regiment's battalions, who continued to lie down. A fly lands in a fresh pool of blood and viscera left by a cannonball, as some of the landwehr accused them of cowardice. Then Major Karl August von Wittring orders the 15th Regiment into the low ground as the cannon continued to slash through their ranks. The cavalry continued its approach, the riders and mounts' eyes wild and focused on the French guns, who were obscured by the smoke that jetted from its barrels. The cavalry bugles then cut through the smoke as they drew their sabers that rasped from their scabbards, flashing in the smoke. The French battalion near the village rushed to the shelter of the buildings of the village. Hearing the thundering horsemen, the French gunners quickly attempt to limber their guns to escape, but it was too late as a bugle announced a charge. The gunners rushed to limber their cannons and escape. The leftmost battery was successful at limbering and shoving off. The gunners whipped the horses bloody as they attempted to escape the approaching cavalry in the muddy ground. The rightmost battery was less lucky as the 3 guns managed to limber and haul off. However, many of the guns fell off their limbers as the gunners rushed to hitch them. So did many of the gunners, who held on to them desperately. The abandoned gunners were quickly wounded or killed as they rushed for the cover underneath the abandoned guns. The commander of the other battery attempted to delay some of the cavalrymen, but after parrying a few sword strokes, he quickly fell as a gaudy corpse. The squadrons continued the charge in 2 columns, moving around the abandoned cannon and cutting down gunners who fell off their limbers. The cavalry rode amongst the fugitive gunners, cutting down many of them with their heavy swords. One of the horsemen stopped, and his horse's hooves slashed down, crushing a gunner's skull. Another cavalryman galloped alongside the first gun, cutting across the driver, his saber dragging through the gunner's sucking flesh. The driver quickly slumped with a pathetic sigh and fell from the limber, which quickly ground to a halt. The squadron rushed to another gun, and the cavalry cut into the chest of the driver, who fell screaming, blood trickling from his mouth. The 2 small squadrons of cavalry rushed up the line of retreating guns, cutting down the people who rode them, causing them to come to a rolling stop. Their captain drove them on with bloodthirsty cries, pointing his saber forward as blood dripped from his blade. The gunners who fell from the limbers or were too slow to get on them in the first place were quickly cut down as they ran alongside the guns, screaming in pain. 2 officers were lost in the smoke and confusion of battle and were soon overwhelmed by cavalry. One was quickly cut down, while the other one parried a sword stroke from one of our cavalrymen, stabbing him in the chest, and was able to escape. As the French cavalry crossed the road nearby, a French battalion opened fire on the approaching cavalry, relieving the gunners. Some of their balls hit the running gunners in the confusion and smoke, and they fell with hoarse screams, but most of the balls found their mark. We charged and captured many guns and limbers until a nearby battalion opened upon us. Despite this, our men, with their blood up, continued the charge at a great cost. The landwehr cavalry continued its desperate charge as bullets hissed through the air, hitting many of the cavalrymen. A corporal took a bullet to the head, a horse of another man was shot, throwing its rider, and 3 more bullets thudded into the chest of a third. The 4th squadron hesitated, then their officer rallied them to charge the guns to their right. Then they were pushed back by the bullets, but their officer made another rallying cry and they charged again. The 3rd in the meantime hesitated under the heavy fire as well. But the fire soon became too much for the 4th squadron and they withdrew. This did not discourage the 3rd squadron, who continued their charge until their officer was hit and slumped over the neck of his horse, and the squadron withdrew. Seeing that his 2 squadrons were pushed back, the captain turned to the bugler and ordered the retreat, his bugle blasting through the smoke. The 1st Silesian Landwehr Battalion now approached the church, catching a French battalion who was forced into square by the Landwehr cavalry. Then von Gatrian moves the 2nd Silesian Landwehr to the left flank, then the 15th Infantry Regiment to the right flank. The men of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr rushed their 2 battalions around the battalion and square, moving to blast open a gap in the corner of the square that was torn open with round shot. Then the men opened fire, the flames from their muskets like pinpricks in the sulphurous smoke. As one battalion fires, the other two rush around them to open crackling rifle fire onto the other faces of the square. Then the captain orders his guns to move up behind the Silesians, the gunners grunting and swearing, moving their guns onto their limbers, tired from doing so in the initial attack from the woods. The captain of the Landwehr cavalry ordered the bugler to once again sound the recall, and the squadrons finally obeyed. As they withdrew, the officer of the 3rd Squadron saw an opportunity to push back the last of the French guns, but the momentum of his squadron forced him back. The musketry from the 1st Silesian Landwehr cracked open the square, throwing down men in bloody heaps. The skirmishers from the leftmost battalion rushed through the blinding, perilous smoke as bullets hissed all around them, after their battalion got into position. The 15th Infantry Regiment continued its march on the right flank while bullets whistled overhead, tearing the cloth of their standard. Then the Jaegers were ordered to the left flank to harass the French battalion on their right flank of the church. Barely had the 1st Silesian Landwehr got into position on the left flank had the French cannon begin to bombard them, so Oberleutnant Johann von Bladowski ordered the 2nd Silesian Landwehr into the low ground farther back, but posted pickets along the ridge to warn him of an attack. The 1st Silesian Landwehr spat a never-ending torrent of flame into the French square, until from the sulphurous smoke came the screams of the charging Landwehr, spitting hatred at the Frenchmen following their black banner. The Landwehr charged the square, screaming despite the long march and despite the heat and smoke of battle. The rage of the bloody loss at Ligny drove them on. The 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr rushed into the bloody gap of the square, screaming like banshees, concealed in the blinding musket smoke and their cries muffled by the cracks of musket fire until they were upon the French square. Then a short vicious melee occurred. In a great cacophony of agony amongst grunts and swearing, men ramming bayonets hard into jackets. Others fired close-range shots which thudded into chests with mists of blood and bone. The blood and soot smeared wounded, screaming and attempting to crawl away, dripping blood. Then the French battalion broke. Some of the men successfully escaped into the village, while others quickly raised their hands in surrender. The officer of the Landwehr battalion struggled to get his men under control again as the musket fire spat from the nearby buildings. Then the Landwehr battalion again advanced on the village. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 15th Infantry Regiment moved to support the Landwehr's right flank. Then a rider from the 3rd Squadron of the Landwehr Cavalry rode to the officer of the 15th Infantry Regiment, saying that a French regiment is approaching the right flank. As the rider returned, the squadron advanced to drive away the last of the French artillery on the right flank. The 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment is moved to delay the oncoming French attack. Seeing the nearby cavalry, the two French columns threatening to outflank us halted to form square. The 1st Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment advanced on the right flank of the church, firing blindly into the smoke, aiming and firing and reloading again. A nearby corpse with ammunition still in its pouches exploded, leaving the remains shredded and unrecognizable. Bullets tore into the ranks of the Prussian battalions. As a bullet thumped into one man's chest, he stumbled back with an astonished face and blood on his tunic. He soon collapsed, gasping for breath. The men involuntarily duck as bullets rip crack overhead, a runner giving a quick report on the situation on the left flank. The Landwehr forms assault columns advanced at the double into Placenoit. As the battalion advanced, the men negotiated dead bodies and debris. "Leave him!" growled the sergeant as a man reached for a wounded comrade. Groups of volunteers from the brigade stormed into houses to root out the sharpshooters at bayonet point. The companies of the 1st Silesian Landwehr inched forward house by house. This was a gutter fight. In the village, bayonets were unfixed to use as knives in the close-quarter fighting. Each musket shot was like a thunderclap in the close quarters of the houses. Suddenly, the pickets from the 2nd Silesian Landwehr on the high ground warned that a French regiment was advancing. The officer of the 2nd Silesian then ordered his entire regiment to the flank. The cannon roared, launching shot and shell screeching towards the attacking regiment, blasting bloody gaps in the advancing columns. A runner arrives at the 3rd Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr before they made another bloody assault into Placenoit, pulling back to delay the oncoming regiment. The Prussian cannon blasted shells that cracked in explosions over the assault column. Then another shell burst over the church, sparks from which threatened to set the roof ablaze as gunners ran in the consuming smoke to reload their pieces. The 3rd Squadron of the Landwehr Cavalry took advantage of the immobilized regiment to sweep away the last of the guns. The horses galloped over the open ground as they kicked up mud, making their bellies filthy. The cavalry charged the guns, but a ball screeching close over the heads of the men drove the squadron back. The guns then used this opportunity to pack up and withdraw. To the left, around the smoke-wreathed hill around the church, the columns of the French regiment crossed the stream, catching one of our regiments off guard, but then turned to face them most gallantly.
Mein Gott, is their entire regiment! Volunteers, right wheel! Lieutenant Failman, go to the commander for assistance at once!
The 3rd Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr wheeled left to face the oncoming French regiment. The 1st Battalion at the same time was ordered out of the Placenoit so they would not be cut off. The battalion struggled to communicate this to their men, as many of them were spread out amongst the houses in the choking smoke and chaos of the village. But not wanting to let up the pressure on the village garrison, the 1st Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment was ordered to advance on the right flank of the church. The regiment beat their drums as they entered the smoke that belched from the nearby burning buildings. The 2nd Battalion in the meantime was ordered to reinforce the Landwehr battalions as the entirety of the 2nd Landwehr moved to do likewise. The Silesian Landwehr was able to untangle itself from the village, many of the men dragging bleeding, wounded, or firing shots towards the village as they left. Bullets thudded into the chests of the men of the columns, and men recoiled, screaming in agony, but they could do nothing but march and die as their kettle drums thundered forward. The men of the Freiwillige Jäger, knowing that their shot, no matter how well placed, could not slow down the French column, so they withdrew, but one of the French battalions hammered a volley into their ranks, and several Jägers fell, thrashing, twisting, and screaming. As they withdrew, the men were hit and crawled away bleeding. This became too much for the Jäger, who panicked and fled. The 2nd Silesian Landwehr finally arrived on the left flank of the 1st Battalion, priming their muskets and preparing to loose a fresh volley into the French columns. All the while, the 1st Battalion of the Silesian Landwehr held the line desperately against the 3 French battalions, firing blindly into the smoke, then ramming another bullet home.
Steady, Kinder, steady! You are the best shots in the brigade, you let those swine know it! The men focused on reloading their muskets, trying to ignore the bullets whistling by and the nearby screaming wounded.
Smoke wreathed the village of Placenoit. It was so thick that it drove some of the men from the buildings, choking and gasping for air. Outside of the village, the battalions poured fire onto the French who returned it. Musket balls whipped crack past some of the men who shivered helplessly. So the men of the 3rd Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr held the line against the French columns. Their muskets cracked, but the powder smoke prevents them from seeing if they hit. The 2nd Battalion of the Silesian Landwehr advanced through the smoke. The only thing leading them was their bugles and flags into the quagmire of fire, mud, and iron. Once the regiment got into position, the commander rode in between the two regiments. Then he sent a runner to the 3rd Battalion, ordering them back behind the new line. Upon receiving the runner, the 3rd Battalion moved at the double, stepping over the dead and wounded who reached out for the leaving battalion and cried out for them to be taken to the nearest field hospital. The 1st Battalion made another assault.
We advanced upon the village, and almost every hole in the wall a musket barrel emerged and fired upon us. Down every street cannons blasted canister, and all the while sharpshooters fired upon us from the church.
The 1st Battalion began its assault on the village, drumming and shouting, followed by their black banners, yelling like avenging furies. However, not long after the assault began, their captain was drilled in the chest with a musket ball. He stumbled back and said, "I'm," before collapsing, and the battalion soon stopped. The 2nd Battalion forms a marching column and moves as bullets whistle overhead. In the incredibly thick smoke, the men of the battalion follow their drum and fife to the left flank. The 1st Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr manages to reorganize to make another assault on the village, but a runner from the captain orders them to the rear. The 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr was ordered to the far left flank to blast fire into the French right flank as they attempted to gain the heights. In the meantime, the French column struggle up the slopes over the writhing dead. As they take heavy fire, officers and sergeants push the men into place as the men fell screaming rapidly. One French battalion halts to return fire, then muskets coughing not very effectively at our troops on the high ground as they receive a hail of lead from our 2 battalions. Then the French bugles ordered their columns forward once again. Their men negotiated the stream, now blood-red and crowded with bodies.
The French column struggled across the stream as our troops poured fire upon them from the high ground. One battalion attempted to return fire on our troops and took heavy fire at our front and flank.
The men of the 3rd Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr, after refusing to fall back, focused on loading and firing with practiced hands. The 3rd Battalion was now reinforced by the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr. Their combined fire roared down on the French regiment. Soon after, the 1st Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr stopped another assault on the village to add their fire into the threat on the left flank. The 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr move around the French right flank at the double. The 1st Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr arrives. One of the larger French battalions stops short of our line, then blasts a volley into our battalions. Several more men of the 3rd Battalion fell in twisted heaps, slipping into the smoke, blood on their greatcoats. The men of the 3rd Battalion focused on reloading, ramming ball, wad, and powder down the smoke-blackened barrels. The colors of the battalions on both sides were torn and powder-stained. The 3rd Battalion fired quickly and blindly into the smoke, halting the French battalions. This made little difference to the French battalions as their leading ranks reeled from the fire from our battalions on the high ground. The 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment moved quickly in marching column, approaching the left flank with bullets whistling overhead. Von Gathrian looks through his telescope on the right flank, satisfied that his men will hold the line against a sudden counterattack. He then moved to take a closer look alongside the battery of cannon. The 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment moved to replace the 2 Landwehr battalions. As the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment advanced, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr continued to pour a tide of lead down the stream into the right flank of the French attack. The 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry now rushes at the double into the suffocating mix of heated air and bitter smoke. As the 2nd Battalion arrives, the 1st Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr withdraws to the rear. They are quickly followed by the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr, followed by their commander, who soon ordered the whole brigade back. The men's ears were dulled from the percussion of the guns, sweat ran down their hats, stick into their stinging eyes. Then sergeants ordered their men to fill in the ranks of the battalions torn up by fire. A man puts his arm around and drags away the officer. The following words were unintelligible as they burble with blood. The 2nd Battalion rushes up again to fill in the gap in the line. The 3rd Battalion, who was the last battalion out of line, moves at the double as bullets hiss all around, then thump into their ranks. At the same time, the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment finally gets into line as the French regiment begins to slowly creep up the heights, firing and advancing, in response to the movement of the Landwehr battalions. As they continue to advance, the regulars intend to send a volley crashing down upon the French battalion. Then the muskets of the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment begin to crackle like burning thorns. The bullets from the regular battalion caused the leading ranks to shatter and halt in a bloody mess. One man mutters curses as he reloads, all the while bullets whistle high overhead. The bullets hit men who scream foully, while another nearby says a prayer aloud, yelling it to be heard over the constant explosions of powder. Seeing that the regulars were in place, von Gatrin begins to form a plan of attack to relieve the pressure on the right flank of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr. To relieve pressure on the right flank, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr make another attack on Placenoit, their nearby skirmishers rejoining their parent battalion. On the far right flank, as the other French regiment is held in place by the threat of cavalry, Oberleutnant von Bladowski orders the Fusilier Battalion to join the attack on the church. As at the same time in the center, 2 Landwehr battalions continue the deadly street fight.
Small parties ran from building to building over broken cobblestone and streets covered in razor-sharp glass, assaulting houses resulting in close-range firefights, scorching walls, and hand-to-hand combat with broken bottles, rocks, and unfixed bayonets.
The 1st and 2nd Battalion, shouting and drumming, advanced on the village, the wadding of muskets setting fire to the grass around the village, the smoke and flame only adding to the hellish environment. The 3rd Battalion, after some rest, was moved into reserve behind the 2 other battalions of the regiment. As they moved, some bullets whined overhead, slapping and tearing their colors. The other Prussian battalions poured fire into the heated, choking smoke, lighting up the smoke with their musket flames. As their musket barrels fouled with powder, the men pissed down their barrels in order to clear them, then dumping out the foul liquid. A soldier hung fire, then threw away his musket. Then a bugle cut through the smoke and ear-hammering percussion, followed by the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr rushing forward with their bayonet-tipped muskets. As the battalion rushed forward, men were plucked back, some of them spinning backward as the French fire punched through the smoke. As the Prussian battalion drew closer to the house on the left flank, the French battalion began to pathetically inch back across the stream. The stream at this point was full of powder residue and blood. The commander of the French regiment rode away and disappeared in the thick bank of smoke as the Landwehr approached. While the battalion continued to return fire on our battalions on the high ground, the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr marched forward following the 1st Battalion. Then the 1st Battalion collides with the French one like a thunderclap and a savage melee erupts. But the French defend with steel and fury, cutting down many of our men in bloody heaps. A man had his musket knocked out of his hands. He was later pinned to the ground with bayonets. Our men pushed back the French battalion. Some of the men splashed across the stream, but many simply threw up their hands and surrendered. The officer then reorganized his men and then charged the next battalion from behind. Hearing the screams like demons from hell, they quickly fled. A French battalion then opened fire on the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr from the high ground on the other side of the stream. The officer ordered the battalion to the higher ground as balls whipped past, some of them thudding into the chests of their men in red welters and screams. The 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr moved up the stream to continue putting pressure on the French flank. The 2 French battalions were pushed back by the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment alongside the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr. On the right flank, the 1st Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment advances on the village to push out the defenders from the church. Von Gatrin orders the assault to continue to push back the last of the French regiments around the church. The 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment. The officer of one of the battalions frantically wiped out the lenses of his spectacles, then touched the New Testament in his pocket, saying a silent prayer to himself. Then he turned to his men and yelled in his thunderous voice rallying cries to the battalion. However, despite the assaults on the village, the garrison quickly took up positions in the nearby houses and began to pick at the battalion. The 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment eagerly obeys, rushing up and opening fire on the 2 battalions left of the church. The 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr, seeing the other battalion taking heavy fire, moved around the flank of the last French battalion across the stream. On the right flank, the Fusilier Battalion of the 15th Infantry Regiment marches up to fire on the vulnerable squares of the French regiment. The French regiment could not retaliate as our nearby squadron waited for them to break their squares. As the Fusilier Battalion marched through the heated chaos of battle, the squadron was recalled, but a shot from the square hit the officer of the squadron, and his corpse nodded then fell from the saddle. That was the last shred of discipline in the squadron, for the squadron soon after retreated through the ranks of the Fusilier. The mounts knocked over some of the men who spat hatred at the cavalrymen. Our men moved at the double to form a firing line along the roads. The officer's sword swept down as the first rank disappeared in a cloud of powder smoke. Now that the cavalry was gone, the 2 French battalions formed into battle line. However, both regiments were in bad positions and got tangled together as they moved up in column. As the columns advanced under the hail of gunfire, they took heavy casualties, and sergeants doggedly closed the thinning ranks of their line, while a conscript loaded, misfired, then loaded again, until a corporal noticed, knocking the musket out of the man's hand, picking up another from a dead man, and handing it to him. As balls cracked by, felling men, the surviving sergeants ordered their men to fill in the gaps. Then a bugle cut through the smoke, and to the south of our battalion, the 3rd Squadron managed to regroup and gallop toward the 2 battalions. One of the battalions, upon hearing the thundering hooves and jingling curb chains, began to fall back, and then retreated. A bugle then blasted through the smoke, and the officer of the French regiment galloped away moments before the charge connected. The squadron smashed into the flank of the other battalion. The cavalrymen's sabers rose and fell, cutting down many of the retreating men. The cavalrymen reveled in the joy of battle, lost in it. As the cavalry continued the charge, bullets cut in between them from our nearby Fusilier battalion, thudding into the chests of the men of the battalion they were chasing down. At the same time, a round shot slashed through their ranks, ripping the legs off 3 men who screamed horribly. The fight around the village still resumed. Men's faces were blackened with smoke and streaked with sweat, while their eyes were reddened by irritation. On the far left flank, the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Silesian Landwehr took terrible casualties, and they began to inch back, so the decision was made to replace them. The 2nd Battalion began to move just in time, as through the smoke a bugle of retreat was heard, and soon from around the house the fugitives of the 1st Battalion were seen. The 1st Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr, after once again being pushed out of the village, made another attack, moving over the dead bodies and rubble. The battery of cannon that von Gatrian was next to had their fire-blackened barrels degraded after constant fire. On the right flank, the Fusiliers looked on in astonishment as one of the French battalions regrouped and swarmed the squadron with their bayonets, forcing the squadron to surrender. On the far right flank, the 15th Brigade was savaged by cannon fire, yet the brigade still stood as more round shot crashed past like sudden gusts of wind, and sergeants filled their ranks as men writhed and screamed on the ground. On our right flank, the Fusilier Battalion marched forward to sweep away the last French battalion. The 1st Battalion of the 1st Silesian Landwehr made one last assault on the village before von Gatrian orders the brigade to withdraw and regroup.
You there! You must be one of Sailman's riders. Come with us, we are going up the ridge. There's no need to go to the heart of the storm. Must be right. Better than finding the next group of French hussars. Sir, there are troops on the walls. I cannot make out their uniforms. I don't like this. Send out 2 companies of skirmishers to skin our advance. Thank you. When I get on top of the damn ridge, I'd better find the doctor that dastard we're here for so I can leave with my scalp intact. Scheiße! 18th Regiment! Form battle line! We must take the fire from those Bonapartists! Get down from there! Do you want to get shot? It's another one of those damn partisans! Get back here, you bastard! Now what do you bastards want? You are not part of the French army. Why do you stop the Prussians? Mad! You better tell me, or I'll do worse than that. Well, we meet at last. I'm surprised your master is not in tow. Why do you work with him after seeing what his country has brought to your own? I'll tell you nothing. Oh well, I guess it matters little now that you're out of the way. Nine! Stop! Hold your fire! These are our allies!